Have you ever stopped to think about what it means to belong? Ever since I was a child, I've always had a confusing relationship with that word. I used to think that fitting in, blending in, recognizing yourself in a group were things that just happen naturally to everyone, and that if at some point that fit failed in me, something must have been wrong with my head. It took me a long time to understand that this sense of not fitting in had a name, and that ancient philosophers had already described it with an almost uncomfortable precision. I recently reopened Plato's Republic, and I came across a passage that completely reorganized the way I looked at my own restlessness. It's about that exact moment when ordinary life simply stops fitting inside you that we're going to talk about now. Maybe you're at a family dinner right now. Maybe you just left one. Someone's telling a story, someone's complaining about the government, someone's showing the video that went viral. Everyone laughing at the same tone, at the same time, at the same joke. And you, sitting there, holding your glass, realize you're watching the scene like someone watching a movie. You can't blend in anymore. It's not anger, it's not contempt. It's a distance, a silent distance that has settled between you and what used to be your world. When the conversation shifts to a sale on a new TV, to neighborhood gossip, to which team is going to win the World Cup, something inside you just shuts off. Your eyes stay open, your body stays seated, but your soul slipped out the back door a long time ago. And when you get back home, instead of relief, a strange sadness comes over you. Not for the others, for yourself, for realizing that you can no longer pretend that any of that is enough. I know it's hard to hear this, but you need to understand something before we go any further. This feeling of being out of place is not a flaw in your temperament. It's not depression to be medicated as a first response. It's not being dramatic. It's not selfishness. It's not a lack of gratitude for what you have. It's a symptom much older, much deeper, and much more sacred than any modern label could ever capture. The philosophers knew this. The mystics knew this. Ancient spiritual traditions had specific names for this moment. And what they said, in unison, is that this instant of not fitting in marks the beginning of a journey that few ever complete. Most people run back to the cave the moment they realize the light burns. You're still here, reading, listening. That already says something about you. Let's talk about why ordinary life has lost its flavor. Because it really has. There's no point pretending otherwise. That promotion at work that used to feel like the whole purpose of existence now sounds almost like a well-designed trap, keeping you in the same chair for a few more years. And right beside it, on the bedroom shelf, rest the products you spent months dreaming of buying, that you finally bought, and that still didn't turn you into anyone different. The curious thing is that this disappointment also shows up in the bigger plans. Travel destinations that once seemed mythical now look like the same backdrop with a different caption swapped in. And maybe the worst part of this crossing is realizing that the people you admired from afar, when actually listened to, with real attention, sound terrifyingly empty on the inside. And you start wondering if you're becoming bitter, if you're becoming unpleasant, if something has died inside you. Nothing died. Something was born. And this something that was born doesn't eat the old food anymore. Think about a child who grew up drinking milk. There comes an age when the body no longer absorbs it the same way. It's not that the milk went bad. It's that the child has moved into a new phase. Your soul is in exactly that process. The foods that nourished you yesterday no longer feed what you've become today. Status, consumption, social validation, constant distraction. They were legitimate foods for a version of you that no longer exists. The new version has a different stomach. It needs something denser, rarer, harder to find, and the conflict you're feeling is exactly the new stomach refusing the old menu. There's no medicine for this. There's only the crossing. This is where Plato comes in. Around 400 years before Christ, in a book called The Republic, he described a scene that remains, more than 2,000 years later, the best metaphor ever created for what's happening to you. Imagine prisoners chained from birth inside a cave. They're sitting with their backs to the entrance, facing a wall. Behind them, a fire is burning. And between the fire and the prisoners, There are people walking by carrying objects that cast shadows on the wall. Since these prisoners have never seen anything else, they believe, with absolute conviction, that those shadows are the whole of reality. They give the shadows names. They argue about them. They hold contests to see who can guess which shadow is going to appear next. Their entire culture, their entire politics, all their gossip, all their competition revolves around things that are nothing more than blurry shapes projected on a wall. Now imagine that one of them, by some accident, manages to break free from the chains. He turns his neck for the first time. He sees the fire. The light hurts his eyes. He wants to go back to his old position because it stings, but some force pushes him forward. He starts climbing toward the entrance of the cave. Each step is more light, and each new wave of light is more pain. When he finally steps outside and sees the sun for the very first time, he nearly faints. It takes time, a long time, before he can fully open his eyes in that brightness. But when he finally can, he realizes the most brutal and most beautiful truth of his entire existence. Everything he had thought was reality was nothing but shadow. The true reality had been out there the whole time, and he had spent his entire life enchanted by smudges on a wall. That's exactly where you are right now. Not in the sun yet, but turning your neck, feeling the first stab of light in your eyes, realizing that what you used to call life may have only been the shadow of a life. That's why the family dinner gets on your nerves. That's why the Sunday TV show has lost its charm. That's why you can't take part anymore in the same conversations about the same shadows. It's not that you're better than the others. Watch out for that trap. It's that you've been touched by something you still can't name. And that touch has ruined forever your ability to pretend that shadows are enough. And here comes a part that needs to be said carefully, because it hurts. The pain you're feeling right now, this anxiety that shows up out of nowhere, this stubborn insomnia, this crying that hits you in the middle of a workday, this disgust toward things you used to consume in peace, all of this consists of legitimate symptoms. Plato made it clear that the prisoner who breaks free suffers. His eyes burn, his legs tremble, his head spins. He feels weak, lost, wanting to go back. The other prisoners, watching his confusion, conclude that leaving the cave drives people crazy. And they use that as their argument never to try it themselves. Look how twisted that is. The very pain of awakening is used as propaganda against awakening, and you're being measured by that same yardstick right now. When you say you're feeling strange, they offer you distraction. When you say something is missing, they offer you more of the same thing that already made you sick. When you say you need silence, they ask if you're depressed. I understand perfectly when you say it feels like there's no one to talk to about this. Because, to a large extent, there really isn't. Now jump ahead 2,000 years past Plato, and you land in 19th century Denmark, and you run into a thin, melancholic man walking through the streets of Copenhagen in a tall hat with a notebook tucked under his arm. His name is Søren Kierkegaard. Practically single-handedly, he invented what we now call existentialist philosophy, and he died before the age of 43, after spending his entire life writing about one very specific thing: the difference between truly living and merely existing. Kierkegaard had a line that cut like a scalpel. He left it in his writings that the crowd is untruth. The crowd is the lie. Whenever something becomes the opinion of many, it loses something essential of the truth. Because truth, according to him, can only be accessed by the singular individual, alone, in the first person, with no hallway of applause. It's worth pausing for a moment on that image. Kierkegaard lived in a Copenhagen where people dressed alike, frequented the same cafes, gave similar opinions, attended the same church, repeated the same phrases on the same subjects. From the outside, it looked like harmony. From the inside, he noticed something terrifying. Most people weren't living a life of their own. They were living a constant echo of other people's lives. The thoughts weren't theirs. The desires weren't theirs. The faith wasn't theirs. Everything was received ready-made, with no questioning, with no inner digestion. And the worst part was that nobody noticed. It was as if the entire city were sleeping with its eyes open. Now swap Copenhagen for your phone feed, your WhatsApp group, your workplace, the conversation at Sunday lunch. The description stays almost identical. The scenery is the same. Think about the weight of that applied to your daily life. Everything you consume all day long comes from the crowd. The most talked about news, the most watched shows, the most shared opinions, the most followed trends, the most imitated behaviors. You're born into an ocean of consensus, and from an early age, you learn that being accepted means thinking the way the ocean thinks, wanting what the ocean wants, fearing what the ocean fears. When you begin to question that, the crowd senses it, and the crowd has subtle, brutal mechanisms for pulling back anyone who threatens to walk away. They call you dramatic, a rebel without a cause, arrogant, strange, a loner, a troublemaker. Any label will do, as long as the discomfort stays on your side and not on the side of the majority. But what Kierkegaard realized, and what Plato already knew, is that truth has never been democratic. It shows itself to whoever accepts the cost of stepping away from the common noise. And the cost is high. I'll be blunt. Kierkegaard wrote a book called The Sickness Unto Death, and in it he described a kind of suffering he considered the most widespread among human beings. A silent despair. A despair that most people don't even know they're suffering from. It's the despair of living a life that isn't yours, of wearing a borrowed personality, of following a script someone else wrote before you were even born. This despair doesn't scream. It numbs. It shows up as chronic boredom, as irritation over a silly reason, as the constant need to have your phone in your hand, as the impossibility of sitting still for 10 minutes doing nothing. The person looks at their own life and thinks everything is fine because on the outside it is. But there's a thin thorn in the throat of their existence, a thorn they can no longer identify because it's been there so long it has become part of the scenery. What's happening to you is that very despair finally rising to the surface. It was always there. The difference is that now you can feel it. It looks like a collapse. It looks like everything is falling apart. But look carefully. It's not your life that's falling apart. It's the shell of the false life that had been covering the real one, like an old skin that has to fall off so the new skin can come through. I'm not telling you this to make you anxious, but to wake you up from the wrong judgment you're making about your own process. You're not getting worse. You're losing the disguise. And whoever loses the disguise first finds it strange, and then is grateful. Notice an unsettling detail. The people around you who seem happiest may not, in fact, be the most awake. They might just be the ones who have invested the most in the disguise. The ready-made smile in the photo, the rehearsed speech about gratitude, the automatic enthusiasm for every new thing. All of that can be defensive architecture against the very thing you're feeling right now. Because feeling what you feel takes courage. And most people, instead of sustaining that courage, pay with distraction, pay with consumption, pay with the performance of happiness. I'm not judging anyone. Everyone survives the best way they can. But it's important for you to understand, what looks like other people being superior is often just their greater talent for keeping the makeup firmly in place over their face. When a crack appears in that makeup, it's treated as a personal tragedy, when in fact, it's the first chance that person has had in decades to actually breathe. Kierkegaard described 3 great stages a human being can pass through over the course of existence. The first one he called the aesthetic stage. It's the stage where a person lives, driven by the pursuit of pleasure, novelty, the interesting. Everything has to be stimulating. Work has to be exciting. Relationships have to be intense. The next trip, the next restaurant, the next movie, the next course, the next love. Life becomes a treadmill of novelty, and boredom is the deadly enemy. The problem with this stage is that stimulation is finite, and the emptiness left between one stimulus and the next keeps getting bigger, until one day the emptiness swallows everything. The second stage is the ethical. The person realizes that pleasure isn't enough and starts organizing their life around duties, values, responsibilities. They get married, build a family, follow a career, do what's right. This stage is more solid, but it has a ceiling. At some point, even after doing everything right, something is still missing that no duty can fill. And here a very specific trap appears that deserves to be named. A lot of people confuse the ethical stage with the endpoint of human maturity. They think being an upright, dependable, responsible person is the peak. So they spend their entire life expecting that correctness alone will be enough to fill their heart. But it isn't. Correctness keeps the house standing. It doesn't fill the house with light. You can pay every bill on time, take care of your people, do whatever needs to be done, and still feel that an entire layer of meaning is missing that no one ever explained to you where to find. That gap is the announcement of the third stage knocking on the door. Whoever confuses duty with fulfillment gets stuck in this phase for their entire life, thinking they just need to try harder, be more responsible, do more right things. When in truth, the effort is no longer the point. The point now is internal, vertical, silent. The third stage is what Kierkegaard calls religious, although you have to hear that word carefully, because he isn't talking about institutional religion. He's talking about the direct, singular, unmediated relationship between the individual and that which transcends them. It can be God, it can be meaning, it can be the deepest calling, but it's a first-person relationship, in silence, with no external approval. This is the most mature stage, and it is also the loneliest, because it doesn't fit into group talk. It doesn't fit on social media. It doesn't fit into bar conversations. It demands a kind of courage that the aesthetic and the ethical stages never required. The courage to look at your own ground and realize that it only holds up whoever steps on it in the first person. It makes sense now why the ground vanished from under your feet. You're leaping between stages. The things that used to feed you in the aesthetic stage have lost their charm. The duties of the ethical stage have started to feel like soulless rituals. And a third thing, still without a name, is calling you. It's as if a door were slightly open at the back of the house, and a light you can't identify were spilling through that crack. You don't know what's in there. You're afraid of finding out. But you can't pretend anymore that the light isn't there. That's the leap. Kierkegaard used that word, leap, to describe the moment when a person realizes that reason and security are no longer enough. You have to jump without seeing where you'll land, with no certainty, no guarantee, no applause. That's exactly what makes the leap sacred. If there were a safety net, it wouldn't be faith, it would be calculation. But before you get to the leap, there's a part of the process no one tells you about. The part about a strange kind of loneliness. Go back to Plato for a moment. When the freed prisoner climbs up and sees the sun, at some point he remembers his companions down below. And right there a very specific feeling is born that maybe you're already getting to know. A mixture of compassion and powerlessness. He loves them. He wants to go back and tell them. He wants to set them free, too. But deep down he knows they're still chained, still arguing about which shadow is more beautiful, still betting on which one will appear first, still handing out prizes to the best guessers of the darkness. How do you warn them? What word reaches someone who has never seen the sun and doesn't believe the sun exists? It's like trying to describe color to someone born blind. You talk and talk and talk, and the other person just smiles politely and goes back to looking at the wall. That is the loneliness of the awakened one. It's not the loneliness of having no one around. On the contrary, you're surrounded. Family, friends, co-workers, contacts, followers, neighbors. There are too many people. The loneliness is about not having anyone to share what's happening on the upper floor of your consciousness. The people you love are still fascinated by the shadows, and you, now, see the shadows for what they really are. There's no unseeing it. There's no way to go back to being genuinely excited about what you already know doesn't fulfill you. You can pretend, out of kindness, out of love for those you love, out of social survival. But at the corner of your mouth, there's a bitter smile that won't go away. And when you're alone again, that smile turns into tears. It's not coldness, it's grief. You're burying yourself. The old version, the version that used to fit. And burying yourself, even knowing something else is about to be born, hurts. There's a delicate point in this grief that needs to be said. You'll start looking at old photos of yourself and feeling a strange distance, as if that person were a close relative, but no longer you. You'll open a drawer and find little keepsakes from a life that seems to have belonged to someone else. You'll remember conversations that used to deeply excite you and realize that today, if they happened the same way, they would feel hollow. This mismatch with your own biography is unsettling. You start wondering if you've lost your mind, if you've become ungrateful, if you're denying your own roots. It's none of that. It's just consciousness rising to a new level. The old version wasn't a mistake. It was the shell that needed to be there so this current version could form. Just as the cocoon isn't betrayed by the butterfly, it is simply, naturally, left behind once its purpose has been fulfilled. That's why silence has started to call you. Have you noticed? Before, you needed noise, music, podcasts, video in the background, conversation, notifications, anything to fill the air. Now, without warning, you want to be in silence. At certain moments, any extra noise feels like an invasion. You turn off the television. You set your phone face down. You sit on the porch and stare at nothing. And in that nothingness, something begins to speak softly. Kierkegaard had a sharp observation about this. He said the modern world suffers from two interconnected illnesses: the illness of hurry and the illness of chatter. Everyone running, everyone talking, and no one listening to anything. In the middle of all that noise, truth cannot manifest. Truth requires withdrawal. It requires a kind of stillness that modern life fights against with all its strength. So when silence starts to call you, it's a sign that something inside you is trying to make itself known. Honor that need. Don't treat silence as a problem. Treat it as the doctor's office where your soul has finally managed to book an appointment. There's a modern scene you might recognize: the bluish light of the phone lighting up your face at 2 a.m, the finger sliding. Short videos, headlines, comments, photos, more videos. You know you should be sleeping. You know none of it is bringing you anything, but you keep going. Why? Because the moment the screen goes dark, silence comes. And in that silence, thought comes. And in that thought, recognition comes. And recognition hurts. So the person postpones silence night after night, year after year, decade after decade, until one day the body breaks down. It breaks down in the form of panic, of insomnia, of chronic exhaustion, of high blood pressure, of a crushing sense of not being able to take it anymore. And only then, in the exhaustion, can silence finally force its way in. But there's another option: to invite silence in before it has to kick down the door, to sit with it, to listen to what it has to say, as uncomfortable as it is at first. That's where the beginning of returning to yourself lives. And here comes the most dangerous part of the process: the temptation to go back. Plato describes this: the freed prisoner, after seeing the sun, at a certain moment feels the urge to return to the cave. Why? Because outside the cave, everything is uncertain. There's no manual. There's no crowd to confirm where you stand. There's no prize for guessing shadows correctly. There's only light, open space, and the terrifying responsibility of creating your own existence with no template. Back inside the cave, there was comfort. Yes, it was dark, but it was predictable. Yes, it was false, but it was familiar. And the human soul has a painful weakness for whatever is familiar, even when the familiar is sickening it. It's going to hit you, if it hasn't already. The urge to drink too much again to blank out what you're seeing. The urge to dive into your phone for hours to numb your perception. The urge to buy things just to feel alive again. The urge to fill your calendar with social plans so you don't have to be alone with your own consciousness. The urge to sleep more, eat more, distract yourself more. All of that is the cave calling you back, and it'll promise peace, but it will deliver a slow death. Because once you've seen the sun, going back to the wall of shadows doesn't bring you peace. It leaves you diminished. It leaves you a traitor to yourself. And the worst punishment in the world, maybe the only real punishment there is the feeling of having abandoned your own soul out of cowardice. There's also a sophisticated version of this escape that deserves to be named. It's the escape inside the awakening itself. The person starts to wake up, starts to feel, and instead of diving into that perception in the first person, they turn the awakening into a new public identity. They become a spiritual character. They collect books to display on the shelf. They sprinkle sacred vocabulary into casual conversations. They post inspirational quotes with a sunset in the background. But inwardly, they remain just as chained as before. They've only swapped the shadow they were watching. Before it was the shadow of status. Now it's the shadow of performed enlightenment. Watch out for that detour. It is the most subtle siren song along this path. True awakening doesn't need an audience. It has no hashtag. It doesn't fit in a caption. It happens in a room no one else enters with you. And the only way to know whether you're actually walking the path is to notice whether you are growing more and more at peace with not being seen. Whoever needs to show off their awakening is, in truth, still asking for approval from the very crowd they're supposedly leaving behind. Here Kierkegaard helps us once more. He has a concept called anxiety, but it's not the anxiety psychiatry describes. It's something older. He defined it in the book The Concept of Anxiety as the dizziness of freedom. Imagine someone standing on the edge of a cliff, looking down. It's not just the fear of falling. It's also the spine-chilling realization that physically, the person could throw themselves off. The abyss isn't just a threat. It's also a possibility. And that vertiginous possibility, that realization that we are free to choose who we will become, produces a specific kind of existential trembling. Ordinary life offered a ready-made path. You're born, you study, you work, you marry, you consume, you grow old, you die. Each step already scripted. You don't have to think. You just have to follow. But when the script breaks, what's left is the abyss. And the abyss, as terrifying as it is the only raw material of genuine existence. This anxiety you're feeling isn't a sickness. It's your soul realizing, maybe for the first time in your life, that it's free. And that with freedom comes total responsibility. You can't blame your parents anymore, or society, or the system, or the opposing party, or the economy. All of those things continue to exist, and to have an influence, of course. But deep down inside you, there's now an uncomfortable certainty. You are the one who decides who you become from here on out. There's no ready-made hallway anymore. There's open ground. And open ground, paradoxically, is the most sacred place a human being can ever set foot on. It's completely valid to feel fear at this point, because the entire structure you had been resting your sense of meaning on starts to feel fragile. That job that promised security to the end suddenly looks like a too comfortable cage. That routine that seemed solid turns into a labyrinth with no obvious exit. Other people's gaze, which you used to factor in naturally, becomes a presence that weighs on you. Everything suddenly seems to demand a decision that nobody ever warned you you'd have to make. And the hardest part is realizing that nobody can make that decision for you. Advice isn't enough. Books aren't enough. Therapy helps, but it's not a substitute. Deep, deep down, there's a room inside your chest where only one person fits. And that person is you. And it's in that room that real life starts being chosen, choice by choice, day after day, in silence, with no witness. Market dynamics, the structural logic of consumption, the constant noise of the feed, all of that conspires to keep you out of that room. Returning to it is, in itself, an act of silent rebellion against an entire culture that can't bear to face its own reflection with the screen turned off. Going back to Plato for a moment, he offers an image that helps explain why ordinary life has lost its flavor. He argued that there's a world beyond appearances. Above the shadows, yes, but also above the sensory world we live in. A world of ideas, of perfect forms. There, true beauty would reside, true justice, true good. Everything we see down here would be an imperfect copy of that. When you feel a longing for something you've never known, when a song touches you for reasons you can't explain, when a landscape stops you in your tracks with no logical reason, it's as if your soul were vaguely remembering that higher world. Dissatisfaction with the ordinary, in this reading, is the memory of the soul, memory of something eternal that it knew before coming down here, and that now it recognizes in small glimpses. It doesn't matter whether you literally believe in that metaphysics. What matters is what it points to. There's something in you that wasn't made to settle for shadows. And ignoring that something, over time, is the most sophisticated way of dying while still alive. If you're enjoying this content, check out the first comment for our exclusive ebook, Alchemy and Archetypes. So what do you do with all of this? Here comes the famous Kierkegaardian leap. There's no formula. There are no 5 steps to enlightenment. There's no guaranteed technique. At some point, after all the analysis, after all the doubt, after all the preparation, you have to leap. To leap out of the old shell without knowing exactly where you'll land. To leap toward the calling that seems improbable. Toward the honest relationship that seems risky. Toward the truth that seems unpopular. Toward the silence that seems like poverty. Toward the solitude that seems like punishment. Toward the inner work that seems like a luxury. To leap without a net. And it's precisely because there's no net that the leap is sacred. If there were a guarantee, anyone would do it. The guarantee is what would stop the leap from being a leap. It would just be a staircase. Kierkegaard wrote a sentence worth carrying like an amulet. He said that the highest task of a human being is to become a singular individual before God, before the absolute, the transcendent, the ultimate meaning. Choose the name that resonates with you. But the central point is the phrase singular individual, not a copy, not a character, not a cog, not an influencer of the crowd. Singular individual means that within you there is a combination of talents, pains, perceptions, and purposes that has never existed before and will never exist again. You are a unique word the universe is saying only once. When you surrender to the crowd, that word gets stuck in the throat of existence. When you take on the radical responsibility of being yourself, the word is finally spoken, and the universe listens, even if no one around you does. Think about how much of that project you've already postponed. How many times you stayed silent for fear of sounding different. How many times you chose the predictable path because the original one would draw sideways looks. How many times you adjusted your own opinion to fit the shape of the group. How many times you swallowed a strong intuition because no one around you seemed to validate it. Each of those small concessions is one less brick in the building of the individual you could have been. And still, the grace is that this building can be picked up again at any age. The work is still open. Every honest decision starting today puts a brick back where it belongs. Every gesture faithful to your deepest perception recovers an inch of the structure. It's not too late. It's exactly the right time for whoever has made it this far listening. Now brace yourself, because the final lesson Plato gives us about the cave is the hardest one to accept. After the prisoner gets out, sees the sun, and understands the truth, he feels the urge to go back down there, not to chain himself up again, but to set the others free, to tell them what he saw. He goes back down with his heart full of hope, thinking his companions will be thrilled to learn that there's a world beyond the shadows. But what Plato describes next is cruel. The prisoners laugh at him. They think he has lost his mind. They say going up only ruins your eyesight, that he has turned into a useless man. And they finish with a chilling sentence. If anyone tries to set us free, we should kill that person. That's not a small metaphor. It's the description of something that repeats itself throughout all of human history. Whoever wakes up is almost always rejected by those they love. The family mocks them. The friends diagnose them. The co-workers whisper. They call you changed, weird, arrogant, problematic. Not because you're wrong, but because your change inadvertently exposes the sleep of the others. And no one forgives whoever holds up a mirror at the wrong moment. I know it's hard to hear this, but you need to be prepared. This path doesn't come with approval. On the contrary, the further you walk, the less approval you'll receive from those who still depend on collective approval to keep themselves standing. And that's how it should be. It's not your mission to convince anyone. Your mission is to sustain the light that has reached you. Whoever needs it will come find you when they're ready. Whoever isn't ready will mistake you for an enemy. It isn't arrogance to bear that in silence. It's maturity. It's a mission. It's the most discreet and most profound way of serving others. You become a silent reference point, and a silent reference point paradoxically transforms more people than any loud sermon. There's one final detail, perhaps the most beautiful of this entire crossing. From the outside, your life may continue to look pretty much as it did before. You'll keep going to the grocery store, paying the bills, going to your nephew's birthday parties, saying hello to the doorman, buying laundry detergent. The shell stays. What changes is everything behind it. You begin to do the same things with an entirely new consciousness. Washing the dishes becomes meditation. Small talk becomes a tender observation of the human. Traffic becomes time for presence. Other people's suffering stops scaring you and starts awakening real compassion in you. Not the social media kind, but the silent kind. The kind that looks into the eyes and doesn't run away. Ordinary life doesn't end. It just loses its tyranny. You're still inside it, but it no longer defines you. You carry the sun inside your chest, and as much as you may still be in the cave going through tasks, the cave is no longer your home. Your home is now interior. That's why ordinary life has lost its flavor. Not because it rotted, but because you started needing different nourishment, and a bigger life, a deeper life, a truer life, has started being born inside you. There's no going back. As much as you try, as much as you distract yourself, as much as you drink, sleep, spend, scroll the feed, run, or pretend, the light that has touched you has already touched you. And whoever is touched by the light, even if they go back to the shadows for a while, feels that going back is dying. So don't go back. Keep walking, even when it hurts. Keep leaping, even without a net. Keep going silent, even without approval. The world needs people who have the courage to be whole, even if they have to do it alone. And maybe, with no fanfare, no spotlight, no audience, you are becoming one of them right now. If something here made sense to you, stay with me for the next video.